Imagine for a moment that your mind is a temple, not a metaphor, but a living structure of sacred function. A space built not with bricks, but with thought, not held together by doctrine, but by design. And at the center of that temple, radiant, still, unmistakable, is Christ consciousness. Not a man, not a myth, but a frequency. The organizing intelligence of divine mind expressing through you. As Emmet Fox once taught, the Christ is not limited to history or scripture. It is a pattern of thought, eternally available, eternally whole. It doesn't come down from the sky. It rises up from within when you stop giving power to what never had it. So before we journey inward, I invite you to like and subscribe, but only if it truly resonates with your soul. Now, the question isn't whether Christ lives in you, it's whether your thinking makes space for it. Because your mind is already equipped. The 12 disciples were never just men, they were mental faculties, powers, functions, and they are waiting to be awakened under one center, Christ. Without that center, the powers remain scattered. Faith becomes fantasy, love becomes sentiment, logic becomes rigidity. But when the Christ is enthroned within the mind, everything real comes into order. You've seen what happens without it. When fear sits at the center, every thought becomes reactive. When ego sits at the center, every power is used to protect a false identity. You can have great intellect, deep feeling, strong will, but if the center is off, the whole system turns inward against itself. Christ doesn't arrive to take over. It arrives when you vacate the false self, when you stop using thought to defend your illusions, when you stop manipulating the powers of your own mind for survival, and instead allow them to serve something higher. That is when Christ emerges not from cloud or vision, but from stillness. And it doesn't shout, it orders, it organizes, it gathers the 12 and sets them in their rightful places. And this reorganization is not mystical, it's precise. Faith becomes Peter, not wishful, but rooted. Love becomes John, not needy, but magnetic. Logic becomes Philip, not rigid, but refined. Each disciple within you stops acting out alone and begins operating under direction. The chaos calms, the noise recedes, because something has returned to the throne, not a concept, but a consciousness. And once this begins, everything shifts. You no longer beg for peace, you think from it. You no longer hope for strength, you act from it. Because your inner temple is no longer divided, it has a center, and that center thinks. Christ doesn't override your personality, it clarifies it. It purifies motive, it realigns energy, it restores power to purpose. When Christ is at the center, your thoughts stop spinning. They begin to serve. They flow not from impulse, but from pattern. Your mental faculties no longer chase emotion, they follow law. And this isn't sterile, it's radiant. Because Christ mind doesn't remove your humanity, it reveals its truest expression. The 12 disciples are not parts of you to control. They are aspects of you to govern with reverence, with clarity, with joy. So, you begin the great return, not by building something new, but by clearing what's false, by inviting each power home, and by letting the center hold. Because once that happens, you are no longer led by your faculties. You lead them, not through effort, but through resonance with the Christ within. This is not theory, it's function. And you are ready now not to learn it, but to live it. Peter is not a man following Christ down dusty roads. Peter is the first movement of your mind toward inner law. The moment faith stops being a distant hope and becomes a living principle. When it ceases to ask if truth is real and starts acting as if nothing else is. Peter is the power of faith, not as emotion, but as command. A mental stance, a steady beam of direction through contradiction. Most people confuse faith with optimism. But faith is not blind. Faith is not hype. Faith is not the pep talk you give yourself when things fall apart. Faith is clarity that doesn't flinch in fog. It is conviction that arises not from what your senses report, but from what Spirit knows. And Peter, your inner Peter, is the first to respond when Christ is awakened within. He is the rock. But not because he's unshakable by nature, because he learns to place truth above appearances. Emmet Fox understood faith not as something you ask for, but something you practice until it becomes permanent. He taught that real faith is faith in divine law, not in outcomes, not in timelines, but in the absolute intelligence that governs all life. So, when you awaken Peter within, your mind stops flailing. It steadies. It becomes available. It lifts its gaze from circumstances and roots itself in principle. Faith becomes function. You still see the problem, but you no longer worship it. You feel the fear rise, but you no longer hand it the mic. You hear the doubt, but you return your thought not aggressively, but decisively to the truth that governs the outcome, not the one the senses announce. This is what it means to think with Peter. Peter doesn't deny reality. He transcends the version of it that's being dictated by fear. He doesn't scream affirmations. He chooses allegiance. He chooses alignment with law, even when the facts scream otherwise. And that choice is power. Because once you stop waiting to feel faithful and start thinking from faith, everything you do begins to reflect that order. Your speech, your posture, your decisions. You stop leaking power into what-ifs. You stop checking the emotional weather before moving forward. You stop postponing action until things feel better. Peter acts because he knows. And that knowing is not based on mood, it's built through repetition. Through thought that returns, again and again, to what cannot be shaken. That is how you build the rock, not by force, by loyalty. You are loyal to divine intelligence, even when logic fails. You are loyal to right thinking, even when emotion rages. You are loyal to what is, even when illusion performs convincingly. And eventually, that loyalty becomes atmosphere. People feel it in your presence. They sense the stillness, the rootedness. You don't need to preach, your clarity does the speaking. Faith is not loud, but it is immovable. And Peter, once awakened, does not waver. He may falter, he may fall, but he always returns. This is the inner posture you are now reclaiming. Not hoping for safety, but standing in truth. Not seeking signs, but recognizing the sign is your ability to hold the pattern when everything else shakes. Peter is not just the beginning, he is the gateway. And once he is in place, the rest of your powers know where to stand. Because now the center holds, the pattern breathes, the temple is rising. Andrew walks close behind Peter not as a follower, but as the next movement of consciousness. If Peter is faith as inner stance, Andrew is faith as action. Where Peter stabilizes the mind, Andrew initiates motion. He is not impulsive, he is decisive. He does not act from pressure, but from clarity. He doesn't overthink truth, he moves with it. Andrew represents that power within you that moves before logic gives permission. The part of you that recognizes alignment and responds. You felt it before, that inner prompt, that quiet certainty. The moment a thought arises so clear, so aligned, it bypasses argument. That's Andrew. His strength is not volume, it's precision. But Andrew cannot operate without Peter. Because without faith, action becomes frantic. Direction becomes distraction. You start doing just to avoid stillness. You perform instead of expressing. You react instead of responding. Andrew, in his rightful place, moves from center. He takes aligned ideas and births them into the world, not to be seen, but to be true. You know the opposite well. The old self that used to wait, waiting for confirmation, waiting for perfect conditions, waiting for someone to tell you it was safe. That's a mind where Andrew was silenced, where action served fear. Now, that dynamic is breaking. Because Peter has spoken, and Andrew trusts the tone. He is the doer, not for ambition, but for expression, not to escape, but to realize. His movement isn't hustle, it's harmony. Emmet Fox understood that when the Christ is awakened, divine ideas must be acted upon at once. Delay weakens them. Overthinking distorts them. The longer you wait, the more the ego disguises truth in doubt. Andrew is the antidote. He moves with immediacy, not urgency. He responds because he knows what is real, and knows that right action is the carrier wave of spiritual power. When Andrew is alive in you, you no longer wait to feel ready. You move because it is time. You don't explain. You don't ask permission. You are not proving. You are completing a circuit. Thought becomes word. Word becomes motion. Motion becomes order in the field. This is the power that reclaims your relationship with manifestation. It restores your ability to birth what you've seen not through striving, but through obedience to your own clarity. Andrew doesn't fear the unknown, because when Christ is at the center, the unknown becomes sacred ground. Not something to survive, but something to walk through with clean steps. Your ideas don't have to be big. They have to be true. Your actions don't have to impress. They have to reflect. Andrew brings your inner knowing into external alignment. He bridges the invisible with the visible, the thought with the act, the intention with the world. And when he's awakened, you stop sitting on the edge of your own becoming. You enter the work. You speak the sentence. You send the message. You build the thing, not for glory, but because it was given to you, and you are now in a position to carry it out. This is no longer about what you should do. It's about what must move through you now that the gate is open. Andrew has been waiting, and now the way is clear. James, son of Zebedee, now steps forward not with force, but with clean authority. If Peter is your inner faith, and Andrew is your direct action, then James is your righteous judgment. The ability to divide, not to destroy, but to distill. To separate noise from truth, impulse from alignment, illusion from law. He is the faculty of your mind that no longer buys the performance. He doesn't argue with emotion, nor does he silence it. He sees it for what it is. James stands as the inner sword that cuts through emotional confusion and brings order where chaos would otherwise reign. Not all thoughts deserve your energy. Not every emotion deserves an audience. James knows this. He is not cruel. He is exact. Most minds drown in analysis. But James doesn't analyze, he discerns. He does not use judgment as punishment. He uses it as a scalpel. His decisions are not born from bias, but from clarity. His purpose is to protect inner order from the storm of opinions and projections. You've known the absence of this faculty well. You've watched yourself entertain thoughts you knew weren't true. You've fed stories that made you small. You've sat in emotions long past their message. That was a mind without James at the table, without the sword of precision that says, gently but firmly, this does not belong. James is not flashy. He is the part of you that quietly begins to filter your inner world, not as a control mechanism, but as a guardian of your own alignment. With James awakened, you don't suppress, you sift. You don't bypass, you clarify. You don't shame the thought, you ask if it serves truth. And in that inquiry, you regain authority. Because judgment, in its rightful place, is not condemnation, it's spiritual alignment. It is the ability to move toward clarity without apology, to prioritize order over preference, to think with your whole being, not just your wounded parts. Emmet Fox taught that the Christ mind does not dwell in confusion. It operates by divine law, and law requires clarity, not rigidity, not moralism, but the clean line that distinguishes what is real from what is not. That is what James offers. He clears space for real growth, not by force, but by discernment. He knows what is worth building and what is hollow. He teaches you how to think, not based on what others want to hear, but based on what holds pattern, what reflects spiritual structure. When James is active in you, your life gets quieter. Not because there's less happening, but because you're no longer reacting to everything. You become selective not from fear, but from reverence. You stop defending every feeling. You stop chasing every opportunity. You stop indulging every mental twitch. Because now there is a faculty in you that filters with grace. And that filtering creates spaciousness. You see what you need to release not as failure, but as fidelity to your true pattern. You notice where your energy leaks not with shame, but with resolve. You correct not to fix yourself, but to return to what you are. James doesn't scold, he clears. And in that clearing, Your inner temple becomes quieter, more exact, more tuned. The signal becomes stronger, the Christ center brighter, and you sharper, stiller, more precise. This is what it means to judge rightly, not others. Your own thoughts, your own alignments, your own internal integrity. The sword is in your hand, and now you know how to use it. John stands not in opposition to James, but in sacred balance. Where James cuts away distortion, John holds the center with magnetic stillness. He is love, not sentimental, not permissive, but cohesive. The spiritual glue that holds your mental structure together when all else pulls you apart. In most teachings, love is reduced to feeling. In truth, it is function. It is the binding agent of consciousness. Without John, even your clearest thoughts become brittle. Your insights become cold. Your discernment becomes division. John ensures that truth remains whole not by softening it, but by infusing it with coherence. When Christ is at the center of your mind, John awakens as the force that keeps your house from cracking under pressure. He doesn't make things easier, he makes them possible. Because love is not escape, it's capacity. Emmet Fox called John the disciple whom Jesus loved, not because of favoritism, but because John represented the very quality that allowed Christ to function without fracture. The mind that judges must also integrate. The sword must be tempered by the center. John is that center. John does not react. He receives, not passively, but receptively. He listens beneath the surface. He holds the pattern when others drop it. He doesn't chase, he includes. In you, John appears as the quality of thought that refuses to fracture. The part of you that continues to bless, even while it discerns, that refuses to demonize even what must be released. That stays whole, even while the old self unravels. This love is not a posture, it's a power. When John is alive in you, your presence becomes magnetic not because of charm, but because of coherence. People don't feel manipulated by you, they feel remembered. You stop needing to prove. You start holding space. And this space is not some vague emotional openness. It's structure. It's law. It is the function of spiritual love as a stabilizing force in consciousness. You've known the opposite. When your clarity turned cold, when your discipline became isolation, when your discernment left you bitter. That was judgment without love. James without John. Now, they walk together. And because they do, your mind begins to glow differently. Not just sharp, but warm. Not just correct, but alive. Because John is not a weakness. He is the capacity to remain relational, even in righteousness. To stay rooted in the truth that all things are connected, even when they must part. He is the reason you can hold power without domination. Speak truth without cruelty. Move forward without resentment. Love, real love, is never about comfort. It's about resonance. And when John leads, your actions begin to carry that resonance. Your words land deeper. Your silence speaks louder. Because your field is no longer fragmented, it's fused. John makes you trustworthy, not by reputation, but by energy. People feel safe to unfold in your presence, not because you say all the right things, but because your inner alignment is intact. This is the love that does not flatter, it fortifies. And now, with John awakened, your Christ mind is no longer fragile. It's held, bound not by will, but by pattern, supported not by approval, but by principle. Your temple does not just stand, it radiates. And the world feels it because now, so do you. Philip emerges as the quiet craftsman of the Christ mind, the builder of structure within you. He does not speak much, but what he brings is precision. Philip represents your power of mental order, the ability to take divine inspiration and give it form, to shape the unseen into function, and to make the abstract usable. This isn't the flash of faith or the fire of love. This is the steady laying of bricks. The spiritual intelligence that arranges thoughts, principles, ideas, into a living pattern that can be walked, not just believed. When Philip is awakened within you, chaos begins to dissolve not because the world becomes less noisy, but because your thinking becomes structured. You stop grasping at insights. You begin integrating them. You stop hopping between ideas and start stacking them in alignment. Philip doesn't ask, "What feels good?" He asks, "What fits?" He isn't dazzled by novelty. He recognizes eternal law and gives it placement. He is the part of your consciousness that knows divine law is not a concept, it's a system. That's why, without Philip, your spiritual life becomes lopsided. You may have strong feeling but no direction, great intuition but no function. You sense something powerful but you don't know what to do with it. Philip ends that confusion. He restores rhythm, harmony, and mental integrity. He helps you see how faith aligns with speech, how judgment informs timing, how love governs response. He connects what was once scattered and builds it into a life. Emmet Fox always pointed to divine intelligence as mathematical, not cold, but ordered. The universe does not fumble, and neither should your thinking. Philip brings that realization down from abstraction and into pattern, not rigid systems, but alive systems, where every thought serves the structure of Christ consciousness. And because of Philip, your mind becomes a trustworthy vessel, not a wandering landscape of feelings, but a designed channel of creation. You begin to ask different questions, not, "How do I feel?" but "Where does this idea belong?" Not, "Is this exciting?" but "Is this true and sustainable?" You no longer confuse movement with growth. You want placement. You want alignment. And that craving for order is not control, it's maturity. Philip isn't interested in spiritual highs. He builds ladders. He crafts the invisible into the walkable. He helps you hold more not because you grip tighter, but because your inner house is finally structured to carry it. You've likely experienced life without Philip. Endless insights that didn't connect. Practices started but not finished. A mind full of fragments that never formed a whole. That wasn't failure. That was disorganization, a pattern unanchored. Now, Philip enters. And his presence is subtle but profound. You begin to revise, reorder, strip away what doesn't fit, not emotionally but functionally. You no longer hold ideas out of guilt. You no longer pursue teachings out of fear. You simplify not to shrink, but to refine. Philip makes you precise. And this precision is spiritual. Because now, your life is becoming a container for the Christ within. Not just a seeker of light, but an implementer of it. You think in alignment. You move in structure. You build what lasts, not because you're obsessed with control, but because you've remembered, God is order. And now, so are you. Bartholomew arrives with a gift you may not have trusted before clear perception. He is not sight in the physical sense. He is the power in you that sees through rather than at. The ability to perceive truth without distortion, to look upon what is, not with fear or fantasy, but with spiritual intelligence. In you, Bartholomew has long been buried beneath projection. The moment you looked through pain instead of presence, through conditioning instead of clarity, you began to forget how to see. And you mistook your emotional lens for reality. But perception is not passive, it is creative. You are not just seeing the world, you are interpreting it. And the filter you use is shaping your experience more than the facts ever could. Bartholomew awakens when your inner Christ begins to clear the lens not by denying the world, but by adjusting how you see into it. Emmet Fox often said, "You are not seeing life, you are seeing your thoughts about life." Bartholomew is the part of you that finally believes that. That becomes curious. That becomes rigorous. That stops assuming the first emotional reaction is the final truth. You've lived under the distortion long enough. You've looked at others and assumed betrayal, looked at lack and assumed failure, looked at yourself and assumed something missing. Bartholomew ends that lie. He doesn't offer rose-colored glasses. He removes the film entirely. He says, "Let's look again, but this time, without the wound speaking for you." When Bartholomew is alive in you, your eyes soften not with naivety, but with refined inner vision. You stop hunting for confirmation of your fears. You stop interpreting silence as rejection. You start seeing people, not their masks, but their pattern. You begin to see opportunities not just through outcomes, but through resonance. You start watching your reactions not to judge them, but to examine the lens they come from. Bartholomew makes your awareness subtle, sharp, spacious. And in that spaciousness, you begin to see what's actually there, not what you expected, or feared, or hoped. But what is? This is spiritual sight. Without it, all your other powers operate in the dark. Faith becomes blind, judgment becomes bias, action becomes misdirected. But when perception is clear, everything real rises into focus. Bartholomew's presence allows the Christ mind to breathe without distortion, to see not as ego sees but as spirit does, not with suspicion but with order, not with defensiveness but with wholeness. You stop needing things to match your emotional history. You start letting them reveal their nature, cleanly. You don't romanticize. You don't catastrophize. You observe. And this observing becomes liberation. Because you realize that most of what you've been fighting was never the world, it was your image of it. Now, that image is being replaced with insight. This is not the kind of sight that gives you superiority. It gives you responsibility. To see clearly means to stop playing small, to stop misreading your own power, to stop projecting limits where law is already at work. Bartholomew doesn't rush you, but he does require you to be present. And from that presence, your inner life becomes radiant. You notice details others miss. You hear what's really being said. You feel the alignment underneath the noise. And in that, your path clears. You are no longer led by assumption. You are led by light. Thomas, so often misunderstood, is not your doubt. He is your depth. He is the power in you that refuses to accept easy answers, shallow certainty, or spiritual gloss. Thomas insists on reality, not the reality of outer facts, but the inner substance of truth that withstands testing. When the Christ mind awakens, Thomas steps forward not to resist, but to refine. He is not cynical. He is exacting. He does not move on slogans or affirmations alone. He waits. He probes. He asks, "Does this hold up when nothing around me agrees? Does this still stand when the storm hits?" In you, Thomas appears every time you challenge your own assumptions not to tear them down, but to verify that they are real. Every time you refuse to parrot someone else's wisdom, and instead seek your own inner experience, Thomas is alive. This is not the doubt that destroys, it's the inquiry that strengthens. Thomas doesn't need evidence in the material sense. He needs inner contact, a felt resonance, a knowing that bypasses noise. He's not anti-spiritual, he's anti-superficial. And in a world full of distraction, that makes him sacred. Without Thomas, you become suggestible. You chase teachings without embodiment. You mistake inspiration for transformation. You follow appearances instead of pattern. But with Thomas awakened, your soul sharpens. You don't reject what you can't understand, you stay with it until it becomes real. You don't dismiss teachings, you distill them. You don't need to be told what to believe, you need to touch it yourself. Emmet Fox never asked you to believe blindly. He taught that spiritual law must be proven through practice, that your life, not your philosophy, reveals your consciousness. Thomas is the part of you that honors that process. He slows you down, but only to make sure you're moving from truth. He holds you steady, not in fear, but in reverence. He checks your motives not to shame, but to align. And because of him, your journey becomes less reactive, more intentional. When Thomas governs, your mind becomes quiet but not passive. In that silence, you begin to sense what is real. You no longer chase highs. You listen. You no longer demand signs. You track resonance. You no longer fear uncertainty. You let the unknown refine you. This makes your spiritual life intimate, personal, not something you perform, but something you walk with. Thomas doesn't want spectacle, he wants substance, and you feel it in your bones when it's there. He teaches you to question, not to undo, but to uncover. Not, is this idea trendy, but does this reflect law? Not, do others believe it, but has it rooted in me? Not, does it sound good, but has it changed me? These questions are sacred. They are how truth is carved into the soul. And when Thomas is fully awakened, you no longer fear not knowing. You honor it, because that space of not yet knowing becomes the womb of real insight. You begin to trust the questions themselves, not for answers, but for alignment. You stop rushing to conclusions. You let the truth reveal itself in rhythm. This is spiritual maturity. Thomas doesn't offer certainty, he offers solidity. He trains your inner world to be measured, grounded, incorruptible. He keeps you honest, clear, steady. And in a noisy world, that makes him rare. Now that he is active, you will not mistake emotion for guidance. You will not confuse charisma for clarity. You will not trade intimacy with truth for acceptance from others. You are building something deeper now, something real. And Thomas is standing guard at the door, ensuring nothing false gets in. Matthew enters like a scribe, but not one who merely records events. He is the inner power of mental transmutation, the faculty in you that takes memory, experience, and even pain and refines them into wisdom. Where others see the past as a burden, Matthew sees raw material. He takes what was and rewrites what it means. You've carried old stories, emotional fragments, patterns that seemed final, moments that hardened into identity, and yet none of these are fixed unless you believe them to be. Matthew brings you the capacity to shift them not by forgetting but by re-seeing. This is no spiritual bypass. Matthew doesn't erase your past, he elevates it. He shines Christ's light on what the old self interpreted in fear. He allows the mind to re-narrate, not with fantasy, but with spiritual intelligence. Emmet Fox said, "It matters little what happens to you. What matters is what you think about it." That is Matthew's domain. He is the part of you that rewrites meaning, not as defense, but as liberation. When Matthew is asleep, your memory becomes a prison. You rehash wounds. You defend traumas. You define yourself by damage. But when Matthew is awakened, the mind ceases to serve the old identity. It begins to align with divine law. You stop seeing yourself as the one who suffered and start seeing yourself as the one who emerged. Matthew rewires your inner narrative. He shows you how to think from the Christ pattern even about your most human moments. He helps you trace the thread of purpose through pain, not to justify suffering, but to reclaim authorship. This power is nothing less than spiritual alchemy, and it demands that you stop worshiping the past, not by forgetting it, but by refusing to feed its false conclusions. You no longer ask, "Why did this happen to me?" You begin to ask, "What did this awaken in me? What pattern is being revealed?" Matthew's presence does not sanitize, it sanctifies. He helps you retrieve the fragments of your experience and reorganize them under truth. What once felt like failure becomes the training ground. What once felt like betrayal becomes the mirror. What once haunted you now teaches you. You begin to tell your story differently, not to manipulate others, but because you are different. You no longer speak from the wound, you speak from the wisdom it produced. Matthew doesn't remove memory, he transforms it. Your inner monologue shifts. You stop calling yourself broken. You stop defending smallness. You begin to walk as one who has seen what fear can do and still chose truth. You recognize that the most sacred ideas are useless if your inner story contradicts them. So Matthew begins the revision, and not through force but through light. He shines awareness where self-pity once lived. He exposes victimhood masquerading as identity. He offers perspective not coldly, but tenderly. He knows what pain did, and he knows what truth can now do. As this disciple awakens in you, your energy changes. You stop repeating the same inner tape. You stop waiting for apology or validation. You stop assigning blame to fate or people or even yourself. You become an editor of consciousness, cutting what no longer aligns, clarifying what must remain, and rewriting what your soul has already outgrown. This is not performance, it is resurrection. And with Matthew fully alive, your mind no longer serves the past, it serves the pattern. It becomes a vessel of redemption not only for yourself, but for anyone who ever needed to hear that transformation is possible, even now. Because you live it. Because you walk it. because now the story belongs to the Christ within. James, son of Alphaeus, often overlooked in Scripture, holds a quiet but radical function in your mind. He governs elimination, not in the physical sense, but in the spiritual. His power lies in your ability to release, to subtract, to diminish what no longer belongs in the pattern of the Christ mind. This is not about cutting things out of your life impulsively. It's not about control or aggression. James doesn't throw things away in frustration. He withdraws power from falsehood. He lets the unnecessary starve by no longer feeding it thought, emotion, or identity. In you, James becomes active when you start saying, "This story doesn't serve me anymore. This habit doesn't reflect who I'm becoming. This attachment has expired its usefulness," not with bitterness, with clarity. Without James, your mind becomes crowded. Even with good intentions, the old still lingers. Thought patterns you've outgrown, roles you still play. Echoes of outdated identities you haven't yet stopped protecting. These are the lingering structures that subtly block the full emergence of Christ consciousness. James clears them, not by attacking, but by withdrawing life force. He reminds you that everything in your mental and emotional world exists because you continue to energize it. He teaches that elimination is an act of higher loyalty, not punishment. Emmet Fox said, "You cannot be free of your troubles until you cease to believe in them." That is James's territory. He does not ask you to fight the problem. He asks you to stop giving it your agreement. This disciple does not operate with loud declarations. He works silently, like a tide pulling away from what once defined you. He helps you unclench without shame, to unclutter without drama. You felt this before, the subtle click, when something no longer fits. When an old role, belief, or ambition just feels done, not broken, not failed, just done. That's James. And when you honor that feeling, you begin to create psychic space, space for truth, for power, for revelation, because your mind can't hold both the false self and the Christ pattern. One must decrease, so the other may live. James teaches subtraction not as loss, but as liberation. He helps you stop managing every detail. Stop defending the old pain. Stop justifying your resistance. He doesn't yell, he dissolves. His power works like the wind eroding what no longer belongs. When James is awake in you, you stop forcing closure. You stop dramatizing endings. You start recognizing that release is sacred, that letting go is not weakness. It is respect for the pattern that is now calling you forward. This power allows your mind to become leaner, lighter, more aerodynamic for spiritual flight. You no longer need to carry the extra weight of outworn attachments. You no longer mourn what truth has already passed through. You release not to escape but to align. This is not cold, it is reverent. You're not severing. You're ceasing to energize what never had substance in the first place. And the moment you stop energizing what is false, the true becomes visible. A thought you couldn't hear before rises. A movement becomes effortless. A burden lifts. Not because it was taken from you, but because you finally stopped gripping it. This is what James makes possible. He is the grace of departure, the soft voice that says, "It's okay to no longer believe this." The quiet exhale that creates room for the Christ to move. Now, your inner house is being cleared, not for austerity but for spaciousness, so that what remains is essential, so that what flows through you is undistorted. And in that stillness, the Christ pattern breathes deeper. Simon the Zealot enters like a fire that no longer burns destructively. He is intensity, made intelligent. The part of you that once fought blindly now fights for alignment. He is the power of spiritual zeal passion, focused not on rebellion, but on rightness of purpose. Before the Christ mind was awakened, Simon raged. He resisted what was. He burned with dissatisfaction. You've known that version, restless, impatient, angry at the world's illusion, and hungry for truth. But without direction, that fire only scorches. It doesn't transform. Simon, when unrefined, is reaction. But once aligned, he becomes fervent will, a current of holy determination that refuses to compromise truth. He is the energy that carries you through resistance not because you're stubborn, but because you are called. Where Thomas questioned and James eliminated, Simon mobilizes. He does not hesitate, he does not second-guess. Once clarity is received, Simon acts as the inner surge that says, "Let's go." But unlike Andrew, who moves swiftly, Simon moves with force, not to overpower, but to pierce through inertia. He breaks the momentum of the false self. He disrupts the loop. He lifts you out of mental apathy and into conscious obedience to divine law. Emmet Fox never asked for passivity. He taught a spiritual path of power with principle. Simon is that power cleansed of ego, rooted in divine will, impossible to manipulate. You need Simon alive when the world offers you excuses, when emotion tempts you to back down, when fear dresses itself up as logic. Simon does not entertain delay. He is not concerned with comfort. He burns for the pattern, and once he sees it, he ignites your whole being into alignment with it. He is devotion in motion. With Simon awakened, you no longer hesitate to sever ties with what dilutes your spirit. You stop explaining your path to those who cannot see it. You stop negotiating with mediocrity. You become decisive not from arrogance, but from allegiance to your calling. Simon doesn't let you drift. He is the force that rises when you've been sitting too long in a truth you haven't acted on. He pushes you up not to run, but to move in rhythm with spirit. He doesn't destroy what's in your way, he reveals that nothing real can stand in your way when your will is aligned. This is not rage. This is refined fire. The flame that no longer consumes, it consecrates. Simon teaches you that not all passion is holy. But when it is, when it's cleaned of self, when it's aligned with principle, then it becomes unstoppable. You need this disciple to remain lit, not out of frantic urgency, but out of reverent demand. Simon keeps you from coasting, from settling, from sleepwalking in truth. He is the one who carries you when the body is tired, but the soul says, "Not yet, there's still work here." He keeps you sharp, not harsh, intense, not reckless, alive, not frantic. And because of him, your Christ pattern begins to accelerate, not rushed, but undeniable. This is no longer about personal growth. This is about spiritual integrity. Simon ensures that what is true moves, that what is right radiates, that what is God-ordained is not delayed by your preferences. He is loyalty in action, fire in alignment, will in service of the whole. And now that fire burns in you. Thaddeus, often veiled in silence in Scripture, carries one of the most sacred powers of all, the power of receptivity. Not passive openness, but conscious yielding to higher influence. In you, Thaddeus is the part of mind that lets God in not as an idea, but as presence. This disciple governs spiritual sensitivity. He is the organ of your inner being that hears what isn't spoken, feels what logic can't track, and obeys without hesitation when the Christ speaks not through thunder, but through stillness. Thaddeus is not loud, he's not assertive, he is attuned. He listens between words. He moves in flow, not command. And in your own evolution, it is Thaddeus who finally says, "I don't need to understand in order to receive." Where Thomas needed clarity, Thaddeus requires trust. And it is not blind trust, it is tuned trust. The kind that comes from deep contact with spiritual law. The kind that no longer demands constant proof, because the inner tuning is so refined, you simply know when something is God-shaped. Emmet Fox taught that when you are attuned to divine mind, answers come not always as information, but as knowing. That knowing arises through Thaddeus. Without him, you cling. You plan endlessly. You delay your next step until every outcome is clear. But with Thaddeus awakened, you begin to walk with revelation, not just reason. You move with spiritual rhythm, not emotional security. This is what surrender really means. Not collapse, not giving up, but conscious yielding to the higher flow. Letting go of mental tension, releasing the death grip of egoic control. Allowing right action to emerge, rather than be forced. Thaddeus gives you peace with not knowing and power within that peace. You become soft but alert, open but discerning. You no longer rush to fill silence with answers. You sit in the silence because you know what it holds. You wait not in fear, but in partnership with law. You stop striving for messages and start receiving them. This is the realm where intuition stops being a whisper and starts being a language, where life becomes responsive, where signs become less important than symmetry, where you don't force next steps, but recognize what's already forming. Thaddeus is the one who lets the river carry you not away from responsibility, but into the next instruction. He teaches that control is a low frequency, and that when you live in communion with divine mind, you no longer have to micromanage reality. You don't need to push, you need to listen. You don't need to anticipate, you need to notice. You don't need to manipulate, you need to align. And alignment requires emptiness, the space where Thaddeus works. He doesn't enter a cluttered consciousness. He waits until you've cleared enough thought, enough tension, enough ego to finally feel what's true. And then you move, without explanation, without needing to figure it out. Because you've heard something deeper than language. You've heard the Christ in you. This disciple brings the soft courage, the still strength, the quiet certainty that doesn't need external agreement because it carries inner echo. With Thaddeus awakened, you become a vessel not of doctrine, but of flow. You begin to trust the timing not because it's easy, but because it's right. You recognize the yes before the words come. You release the no without justifying it. And because of that, your entire field changes. You're no longer reactive, you're responsive, no longer grasping, you're receiving. And in that receptivity, the divine pours itself in. Judas Iscariot, the most misjudged of the 12, does not represent betrayal in the context of the Christ. Mind, he reflects the shadow of possession, the moment when the human self clings too tightly to what it believes is power, control, certainty. He is not merely a figure of tragedy. He is the living symbol of what happens when divine impulse is hijacked by personal agenda. Judas is present in every soul that seeks the kingdom, but secretly wants to own it. He is the part of you that fears surrender because it cannot profit from it. The voice that says, "Yes, I want truth, but let it come on my terms. Let me still look good. Let me still win." It is subtle, it is slippery, and it is deeply human. But Judas is not your enemy. He is your final reckoning. Until Judas has been seen, you will mistake your ambition for devotion. You will call your controlling nature purpose. You will spiritualize your manipulations. And you will wonder why the light does not arrive. He is the dying grip of the ego, masquerading as loyalty to truth. And the moment you see him in yourself, not with shame, but with holy clarity, a sacred breaking begins. A necessary death of what you thought was devotion, and the terrifying, liberating realization that you cannot possess God. You can only become available. Judas must fall, not to be condemned, but to be freed. Emmet Fox never lingered on sin or guilt. He pointed instead to false belief, the lie that says you can serve two masters. Judas is that inner duplicity, that pull between surrender and survival, between selflessness and self-image, between the Christ impulse and the fear of losing control. And when Judas collapses in you, it is not an act of defeat, it is a release. But before that release, there is grief. Because Judas carried your best effort, your striving, your intelligence, your belief that you could handle the divine without letting go of the human scripts. When that part of you dies, it hurts not because it was evil, but because it was familiar. You feel disoriented, hollow, empty of story, but not yet full of spirit. This is the valley, the place where your mind goes quiet not in peace, but in disintegration. You can't go back, but you can't yet move forward. The inner betrayal has happened. The false light has collapsed, and you are left standing in the ashes of your well-intended illusions. This is the moment where many turn back. But if you stay, if you do not rush to rebuild the old forms, if you resist the urge to repackage your ego as insight, then something holy begins. In the aftermath of Judas, a silence opens. And into that silence, the Christ finally enters not as a concept, not as energy, but as presence. No longer filtered through your plans, no longer forced into your strategy, just there. Quiet, patient, real. You do not rise immediately. You do not radiate. You sit, and you let the parts of you that needed to perform, persuade, and prove bleed out. You grieve them not because they were wrong, but because they are done. And in that death, you live. Judas was necessary not as villain, but as mirror. Not as failure, but as the final wall between you and spiritual transparency. When he falls, the curtain lifts. There is no more acting, no more roles, no more using God to decorate your identity. Only God. And now, the path clears, not because you see it, but because you no longer need to. You walk, not with certainty, but with empty feet. You speak, not with strategy, but from clean space. You live, not to prove, but to be inhabited by something higher. This is what Judas gave you, the threshold between false light and the real flame. Matthias, chosen to replace Judas, does not emerge from spotlight or drama. He arises from inner restoration, a quiet return to spiritual integrity after the system of self has collapsed. Where Judas exposed the fracture, Matthias mends. He is the part of you that returns to the pattern without needing reward, without needing recognition, without needing to be right. You do not choose Matthias in a moment of triumph. You choose him in the rubble. After your spiritual constructs have failed, your egoic strategies have dissolved, and your inner stage has gone dark. From that quiet place, Matthias steps forward, not flashy, not grand, but true. He does not perform, he serves. He doesn't lead with charisma, he aligns with order. He doesn't ask to be seen, he asks, where does my presence contribute to the whole? This is the final power of the Christ-mind substitution through essence, not through image. Matthias represents the principle that anything lost can be made whole when truth is restored to its rightful place. In you, he is the sacred repair, the ability to reestablish the pattern not through effort, but through honest return. No dramatics, no compensations, just a clean yes to the divine template, a yes that needs no audience, a yes that comes after the storm. Matthias holds no old ambition. He carries no echo of the previous performance. His strength is neutrality, the rare, holy strength of being exactly where Spirit asks you to be, without chasing anything more. This is where many flinch. They miss Judas's intensity. They miss the identity rush. But Matthias is a still fire burning steady, without flash. He is Christ in you becoming functional, normal. Daily. No longer theatrical, just present. You do not rise with thunder after your betrayal. You rise with Matthias, with the willingness to walk again, to rejoin the work, to stop grieving who you were, and to begin inhabiting who you now are, not out of desire, but out of inner resonance. There is no applause in this moment. There is no certainty. There is only alignment. Matthias does not restore what Judas lost. He replaces it, not with more brilliance, but with wholeness, not with spectacle, but with availability. You stop seeking redemption through others. You no longer perform wisdom. You inhabit it quietly, deeply, steadily. You begin to speak again, but this time, not to impress. You act again, but this time, not to achieve. You serve the pattern. And from that, something extraordinary happens. Not outside of you, but in your field, in your aura, in your tone. The room changes when you enter, not because of you, but because of what's flowing through you. People no longer see effort. They sense integrity. You don't shine louder. You radiate cleaner. Matthias is the part of you that will never again sell out your soul for relevance. Never again trade alignment for approval. Never again compromise essence for image. He is the sacred repair. The unshakable yes that rises not from triumph, but from transformation. Now, with Matthias awakened, the circle is complete. 12 powers, 12 intelligences, 12 inner forces realigned to serve the Christ pattern not in concept but in you. The mind is now a sanctuary, each function restored, each center awakened, each falsehood laid down. You no longer seek the kingdom, you carry it. Now the 12 are one, and the one is you, not as a symbol, not as a metaphor, but as a living arrangement of awakened faculties, each power not merely understood, but inhabited. Each inner disciple no longer wandering, but integrated, functioning in harmony beneath the light of the indwelling Christ. This is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of real movement. For all that preceded this moment was preparation, breaking, clearing, realigning. But now, with these 12 forces consecrated to divine order, the Christ mind no longer struggles for space. It breathes in fullness through your being. You've walked through silence, fire, and collapse to reach this stillness, not to find perfection, but to release resistance, not to become invincible, but to become available. This inner sanctuary is the throne room, and the King is already seated. There is no coronation, there is no noise, just recognition. You do not become a saint. You become whole. You stop reaching outward and start radiating inwardly. And in that radiance, everything real begins to arrange itself around you because the pattern you now embody is the pattern of divine causation itself. You think, and it moves. You speak, and it aligns. You walk, and the field shifts. Not because you are powerful, but because you are clean enough to carry power without distortion. This is the true gift of the 12. They are not traits to develop. They are channels to clear, not goals to master, but inner intelligences to surrender to. And now, your being becomes the host for something beyond brilliance presence. Presence that corrects without words, that uplifts without effort, that restores simply by being fully what it is. And with that, you remember, this was never about doing more, proving more, or acquiring more. This was always about making room. Room in your mind, room in your will, room in your breath, for the Christ within to move as you. You are not escaping the world. You are transfiguring it from the inside, through order, through principle, through the awakened counsel of the 12. And you will still live, work, speak, and rest. But all of it now emerges from pattern, not strategy, not fear, pattern. You are not simply spiritual, you are available to the divine function. And from this point forward, everything in your life that does not align with this order will fall away not as punishment, but as realignment. You will not need to force change. The structure itself will do the work. This is the power you carry. Not the power to dominate, but the power to reflect accurately, to embody what is timeless, to serve what is sacred, to offer your being as a clear vessel, no agenda, no distortion, no delay. Now the 12 shine as one, and the Christ is living in you. And now, you rest not in exhaustion, but in fullness. The pattern has been revealed, the channels have been opened, the inner kingdom has been restored to symmetry. Let yourself settle into this recognition. You have not added something foreign to your life. You have cleared away what blocked what was always there. The Christ was never absent, only obscured. Now it speaks through every breath, every choice, every moment of presence. Do not seek to hold this. Let it hold you. Do not race to use this. Let it move through you. Walk in your day now with simplicity. You do not need to prove your enlightenment. You only need to remain available to truth, not as an idea, as a state of being. And when old patterns rise, you do not need to fear them. You are not that anymore. You are the one who sees, who orders, who chooses again. The one who lives not in reaction, but in rhythm. This rhythm, this living Christ is not a religion, not a role, not a theory. It is the tone of your mind now, the light in your eyes, the silence beneath your thoughts. It is the intelligence of God taking up residence in the ordinary moments of your human day. Let that be enough. Let it lead. Let it live.